Hi, I'm Bob Stilger from News Stories, and I'm very happy to be joining you again for another Facebook Live. You know, when we were planning this series, we thought that today we would take a look at the two loops, which is a way of thinking about the world, a way of looking at the world and being in the world that we've developed over the last 20 years at News Stories and at the Berkana Institute. But then over the weekend, I live in Spokane, Washington, and on Friday, the temperatures hit 107. And over the weekend, the air quality was so bad that the advisory was for everyone to stay indoors. And I watched the news reports come in of the growing fires in Northern California. And of course, I breathe the smoke here in Spokane from the fires that are surrounding us. Not close, but they sure are close to the communities where they're happening. And I realized that it wasn't time. It wasn't time to be talking about the two loops. It was time to be talking about now. Time to be thinking about, what do we do with this mess we're in? Part of what's happened to me over the last couple of months is that I used to use the term new normal. And it dawned on me, this isn't so new anymore. This is our now normal. It's unpredictable. We don't know when it's going to hit. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know where it's going to go. And it's our now normal. We live in a time of increasing uncertainty, deeper and deeper perturbation. How do we live? How do we live well now? And at one level, when I'm confronted by that question, what I realize is I don't have any answers. It feels overwhelming. It feels like one form of collapse or another is inevitable. What do we do with that? What do I do with that? What I know as well is that people all over this country and all over the world are actually stepping forward to do what they can, to do what makes sense. Where does it usually start? It starts with people who begin to say, this is what's really important to me. This is what I care about. This is what I want more of in my life and in my community. And then they start to turn to others and they start to say, what about you? What's important to you? What is it that we want to do? What's the change that we want to make right now? Sometimes it feels helpless because most of that are not big sweeping changes. They're the little things. They're the things of daily life. And what I believe is it's those things of daily life that seed the changes that we want for now and in the future. Is it enough? I don't know. But I know that's where it begins. I know that we're in a time when we can and we must turn to one another and start doing what's really important, doing the things that we care about, making the changes that we can see. Some of you know that I've spent a lot of time working in Japan after the triple disasters of March 11th, 2011. A few months ago, when I was in Japan, I started having conversations with my many friends and colleagues there. And we started asking the question, so what's happened? What's shifted? What's changed in the 7 years since the disaster? I always remember a time 2 or 3 weeks after the disasters happened, and I was helping to facilitate a gathering of business leaders in downtown Tokyo. When they came in, even though many of them knew each other, everyone was staring at their shoes. No one wanted to be there. No one knew if they had anything to say, what it might be, or if they'd say it. The air was very, very thick. 3 hours later, the room was just excited. And the change in those 3 hours was so different that I had to do a stepping back, and I had to say, what's happened? What's happened in this last 3 hours? And as I listened in, this really big voice comes pounding into my head. We've been released from a future we did not want. That was the energetic impact of the disasters. What does that mean 7 years later? Well, 7 years later, there's been a pretty irresistible push to get back to that old normal, the old normal that we knew even if we didn't want it. So we talked about that. We said, yeah, there's been this change and there's been that change. But by and large, what's happened is we're back to where things were in 2011, except what's shifted is that for many people, the disasters were a huge wake-up call in which they said, really? I'm alive. That's pretty good. So what the hell is important to me? How do I want to spend my life? And for 7 years, people have been stepping into that question. Not everyone, but enough, a lot. And what we started to realize that those are the seed crystals. Those are the starting points. That's what needs to be nurtured. The sense of, I have to step forward into what's important in my life. Let's come back to the fires now in the Northwest and in the Canadian Southwest. As I talk to people, the same sense of wake-up call is going on. The same sense that we actually can't deny that we're in a bit of a pickle. This is not going to go away. This is our now normal. We are going to continue to have forest fires every summer. I don't know for how long, probably for the rest of my life, maybe for the rest of yours. We're existing in extraordinarily brittle conditions. What does that mean? It means that people are saying, if that's what's going on, it's time for me to think about what's really important in my life, because that's what I need to step towards. One of the things that New Stories is working on is that we're about ready to start calling in something that we've named the Preparing for the Possible Network. And we see this network is stretching from Northern California up through Oregon and Washington, up into British Columbia, over into Alberta, and then swinging back around down through Western Montana and Idaho. This patch of territory, this patch of earth that New Stories has grown up in. It's the place where we have relations. It's the place where we've walked the land and we know others who have. Not long ago, when I was in Kyoto officiating at a wedding, there was one person that said to me, why aren't you guys doing any work in Puerto Rico? And I had to think about it for a while. He and I had been talking about Puerto Rico. What came to me is that that's not our land. We don't know that culture. I don't know that culture. I haven't walked on those trails. I haven't drunk that water. If somebody invited me in, I'd be there in a heartbeat. But this is the region of my birth. This is where I've grown up. These are the trees and the lakes and the streams and the oceans that have been the basis for my life. This is where I can directly contribute. So the Preparing for the Possible Network really has 4 primary functions. The first is to connect people throughout this region who are already doing this work, who are already figuring out how to build strong, healthy, resilient communities, and who are doing that by bringing communities together, by remembering and refostering a sense of belonging. And we've got lots of terms that dance around in this space: social cohesion, fabric of community, belonging, thriving. They all come down to the same thing. We're in this together and we need each other. So it's time. It's time to start connecting people across this region in new ways who are doing that sort of work. Second, it's time to find out what we collectively have learned about what works and what doesn't. What are the successes and what are the lessons learned from efforts intended to rebuild community resilience? What we know is that when we talk about community resilience, when we talk about belonging, that those are the strongest antidote, those are the strongest response to the traumatic stress that is so widespread at this point in time. Part of what we've been looking at is that it's fair to say that right now, wherever you turn, you find people who are in chronic stress. It's especially true for those who have been forced to the margins of the culture, people who are unemployed, people who are homeless, people who have mental and physical disabilities, people who look different, think different, aren't the same as dominant culture, and we keep pushing them out. Okay? Those folks in particular, but all of us, are in a period of chronic stress. Then what happens is another perturbation comes along, another wildfire. You know, I talk to the people in Northern California who say, wow, and ignore the phone. It's my landline. It just brings junk mail. Talk to people in Northern California and they talk about the post-traumatic stress of smelling the smoke in the air and how it reminds them of October 8th last year when the fires came. Lost my train of thought. Those bells in the background. I'm going to have to find some way to turn that off as we do this more. What we know is that each time a perturbation like that comes along, it lands in that foundation of chronic stress and it creates traumatic stress. What we also know is that the way that we step beyond traumatic stress is by turning to one another, by belonging again, by knowing each other. So starting to figure out, what have we learned about doing that? What have we learned across the region? Next, we need to convene. We need to support the local gatherings and the translocal gatherings that bring people together to say, what are we doing? What have we learned? Where are the challenges? And what comes next? Part of all of this means that it's time to familiarize and normalize a set of practices that actually serve us well in these times of disaster. You know, we need to get to the point where having a go bag in the hall closet in case something strikes is just a normal practice. Of course I've got one. Who wouldn't? Of course I've got 2 weeks supply of water. Who wouldn't? Of course I've got a couple weeks supply of food as well. Who wouldn't? These are just normal things. They're normal things that we need in our new now normal. They're what we have to pay attention to. And we have to develop community-based, community-owned, community-aware systems that when shit happens, we know how to turn to each other. We know where we're going to take care of the people who are displaced, either from their homes or their jobs or both. We know how we're going to support the people who find themselves just in extraordinary, incapacitating grief. We know them because as a community, we've created them and we've embraced them. And we're not turning away anymore from the fact that we're in a time of chronic stress. We're in a time where things keep falling apart. And, you know, granted, at the same time, there's also some wonderful things that are going on, some wonderful things that are happening. But the foundation that we're living with is this foundation of chronic stress. And it's time to not ignore that. It's time not to just say, well, the air's bad this month. I guess that's the way it's going to be. That's important. That acceptance is important. But then stepping into that further and saying, what am I going to do? What are we going to do? How do we prosper in these times of chronic stress? How do we prosper in these times of social collapse? I don't remember if I mentioned this on one of the earlier Facebook Lives, but when I was in California, Northern California, last month, one of the things that suddenly just washed over me was that for years now, I found Joanna Macy's framework of the Great Turning and the Great Unraveling to be really helpful. And what I realized is that the Great Turning and the Great Unraveling are now held in the Great Passing. We're at the end of an era. What's gone on before is over. It's still here. We're still in it. But this is not the way our future is. We don't know what our future is. My book, After Now, When We Cannot See the Future, Where Do We Begin, speaks to that. We can't see the future now. But what we can see is that what's been before is ending. The chronic stress of what's been before is increasing. What's going to happen next? I don't know. But what I do know is that we need each other. And we need to reach out across many differences, and we need to be willing to listen to each other in deeper, more fundamental ways, because it's with each other that we'll begin to create something new. So I want to, if you're here in the Northwest, it sounds a little bit paradoxical, but I want to invite you to breathe. I want to invite you to breathe in this smoke. I want you to breathe in this time and ask questions about, really, what's important? Why are you here? What's this life about? What is it you want? What do you need to let go of? What do you need to restore? Who do you need to turn to as we create the future that we do want, rather than the one that we're being released from? We're going to keep exploring these questions. This whole Facebook Live effort is an interesting one. What's happening is that I'm identifying other people that I want to bring on as guests. Some people that will be in a kind of an interview mode. Others that will be in more of a dialogue. We're making this up as we go along. And we hope that you're finding it useful. If you're finding it useful, a couple invitations. One is, please go to the newstories.org website and make sure you're on our mailing list. We're redesigning our whole social media outreach, and we want to make sure that we can reach out to you easily, not just through Facebook. Secondly, if some of the things that I'm saying, if some of the issues that we've explored in this and earlier Facebook Lives are of interest, please go to afternow.today, the website for my book, and get a copy. Get a copy of the ebook, get a copy of the hardcover book, softcover, beautifully illustrated. It's another way to explore these questions, and they're pretty reasonably priced. It also helps support New Stories and support this work that we're doing. So I look forward to seeing you next week. Next week, I'll be on with Simone Torrey, who's our executive director, and we will be exploring the two loops. Two loops is a pretty simple and powerful way of looking at the time that we're in and how we want to dance with it. So come on back. If you found this video useful, please share it on pages that you manage, share it with your friends, pass it around. We're committed to having New Stories stand for these questions and issues. we've just got a new tagline. We're going to start referring to news stories as change your story, change what's possible. And that's what it's really about. It's time for us to change our stories and to change what's possible. Thanks for spending 20 minutes with me this afternoon, and I look forward to interacting with you next week. Be well.